go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everyone. I am Kashima, Assistant Director of Alumni Communities and Volunteer Engagement within the Alumni Relations Department at UChicago. I am very excited to welcome you all to our Mind Your Career webinar entitled Going Through Career Transitions. I will have the pleasure of moderating our panel conversation with alumni who have made career pivots to different industries. So a little bit of house rules. Today's webinar, feel free to drop your questions in the chat box and we will try to answer them during the conversation or towards the Q&A. Following the session, a survey will pop up. So please participate in that survey. We'd love to hear your thoughts about today's webinar. And then lastly, we will send a recording and additional resources if necessary to all attendees, hopefully by Friday, if not the latest on Monday. So please be sure to look out for that email. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. I would love for our panelists to introduce yourself. So share your name, your degree, your current position, and what your previous industry or profession was. So let's start it off with Logan.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. My name's Logan. I got a BA in econ from the college, and right now I'm working on starting up a couple companies of my own in the financial services industry. But previously, I worked on internal consulting teams at Hulu and Peacock, and then most recently Slack and Salesforce. I'll pass it on unless you want me to keep expounding. I'm happy to continue to talk, but otherwise, I'll pass the mic.
Yeah, Isis, if you want to join in.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Hello from Houston, Texas. My name is Isis Smalls. I graduated from the college as well with a bachelor's in anthropology. I also participated in the UChicago Careers and Business program while I was there. And I am currently in the commercial real estate industry. We'll get into this in a bit, but I'm actually making a pivot in real time. But this is an industry that I'm sticking with for a while.
And that leaves me, I guess. Hi, everyone. My name is Maya Scheidel. I graduated from the college in 2017 with a degree in environmental studies and a minor in visual arts. I currently work. This is also a new role. I'm growing in my current role. I am now head of product, and I also manage all of our design. Work at a very small startup in the mortgage and real estate space. And prior to that, I actually worked at the University of Chicago undergrad admissions. I was there for a couple of years, and we'll go more into the details of all the transitions. But that's the super high level where I'm at right now.
Fantastic. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. And before we go deeper into the conversation, I did find some mini facts about adults who make career transitions that I would like to share. So first is the average person changes careers 5 to 7 times during their working life. Um, I know that you guys did not know that. The second fact is about 30% of the workforce changes jobs every year. And then lastly, in 2021, about 53% of adults who quit their jobs changed their fields of work. So obviously, changing careers is very common. Everyone does it. And there are various reasons why someone may want to change their career. It can be including wanting a salary increase, wanting more financial stability, or maybe they just have an interest in another field of work and want more upward mobility. So I would love for our panelists to kind of share their current role and what inspired you to take that leap into your new career path. So we can start off with Isis.
So prior to being in the commercial real estate industry, I was actually formerly a teacher. At first, when I graduated, the first 4 years out, I was a teacher, did an awesome program called Teach for America, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. And that really gave me a love for youth and a love for just pouring into their lives and making a difference in the community. I ended up staying and teaching for 4 years and decided that I wanted to expand that platform by transitioning into being a speaker and an author. So I still work with youth, went to youth camps and churches and ministries and you name it, any kind of platform that will allow me to impact youth. But at some point within those first 8 years of graduating, I thought to myself, I love the community engagement, but there's also this UChicago side of me that's like screaming for strategy and analytics. And I really wanted to be pressed in a different way. So I decided, well, what else do I want to do? Where else do I want to, what else do I want to explore? And that's when I landed on the commercial real estate industry. So that pivot for me was primarily because I wanted to stretch a different side of me. I wanted to grow in a different way.
Yeah, and Logan, how about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first graduated, the value set that I had was I just wanted to work at cool companies with lots of resources. I wanted to be in tech. I wanted to be in California. And so that's what kind of drove the decision making there. But this past year, my dad found out that he had kind of an aggressive cancer that was going to kind of threaten his life. And so that changed his value set pretty dramatically. And he came to me and asked me if I would consider leaving Slack to try to start something up with him. And so I think for him, confronting your mortality has a way of reframing how you think about like your life and legacy and what you want to get out of a job. And so, building a company, trying to start something with his family isn't really so much about creating an income as it is more about like crafting a sense of family cultural and like the culture and identity. And so I think, like, of course, yeah, that caused me to reframe what was important for me to get out of a job. And so I kind of immediately started to prepare to make a career change soon after that. And so I think, like, obviously my situation is not an everyday one, and the specifics of it might not be like applicable to you. But I think the framework that I approached it from is that you can kind of go through this process of continually reevaluating what your set of values are and what you want to get out of a job. And if your values change or if your situation changes, then it's totally okay to give yourself permission to make a pretty radical change.
Yeah, for sure. And then lastly, Maya, what inspired you to make that leap?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned earlier in my introduction that I used to work at UChicago in the admissions office. I was there for 4 years, and I started that job after I graduated. And I I loved working at UChicago. I loved working with prospective students and admitted students. And after a couple of years, my role had changed during my time in admissions, and I kind of realized, I'm gravitating more towards the creative side at in admissions. And I don't know if some of y'all have friends that worked there or work currently. I wear a lot of hats, and so in addition to talking to students and admitting students and reading apps, I also worked on the marketing and communication side. And so that's where a lot of this interest for changing into my current role and path I'm taking, where a lot of that started, because I was working on our website. I was helping with event communications and coordination with prospective and admitted students, and having more of a role there kind of piqued that interest. And I was learning about different things that I may want to do after leaving admissions, and came across UX design. And this was kind of the perfect blend for what I felt my strengths were and my personality type and the things I enjoyed doing in my professional sphere, where I was able to really combine a lot of those kind of people focused skills, and that strategy and the thinking that I've been doing in the admissions world, but then also kind of add more of that creativity and true design element in there that I was enjoying before. So I reached out to my community and my space and connected with folks who had been in the product design or UX space. And that's really where I started feeling like, wow, this is something I want to pursue. And so I ended up leaving admissions. I did a boot camp to just kind of spruce up those skills, make me feel confident in some of the hard skills that I need to apply. And after a few months, was able to connect and find a role that has blossomed into what my role is currently. And so I've taken that, it was originally just UX designer, kind of coming in, being a part of the team, to now leading a lot of those elements in my role. And anyway, that's kind of the long story there, but a lot of it just came down to like, what do I really enjoy? How do I want to make an impact? What are the things that I'm really like feeling that I'm getting into that flow state in my work, and how can I make my life include more of that? And that's kind of what led me to where I am today.
Yeah. Maya, I would like to ask you a follow-up question. So you mentioned, participating in a boot camp. And some career transitions may require some upskilling. So I would love for you to share more about, this boot camp experience. Like, how did you prepare yourself for this program? And what advice would you give to someone who is also considering a boot camp or continued learning?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, for me, and I think maybe many of you relate to this, being a UChicago alum, I really wanted to make sure I did my research before embarking on any sort of boot camp or program. I wanted to make sure that what I was doing was going to be worth my time and really help me kind of take that next step. And so my very first step before even enrolling in a boot camp was just to kind of read reviews, chat with alums who had done these different boot camps, and kind of make that informed decision. And I ended up going down one route, and I really enjoyed it because there was this like intro course that I could do without committing to this full boot camp first. And so that really helps me feel confident of, okay, let me do this. It's I think it was maybe 6 weeks, 8 weeks. It was much shorter, part-time. I was able to do it while I was still working in admissions, and that made me feel confident that yes, this is the place that I want to continue this education. And so I ultimately signed up for the full course, and then I did that full time. I think something to keep in mind with boot camps, they come in all different sorts of shapes and sizes, and there's one boot camp that may be perfect for me, or someone else may not be the boot camp that's for someone. Like, you kind of have to determine what you're looking for. Do you want it to be full time, part time? Are you going to do it while you're also working? Are you going to leave your role and kind of commit full time? So for me, I knew that I wanted to move into that direction full time, and I think the boot camp was only a couple of months, and then during that time, I was also doing what I could to kind of work freelance or just build up my portfolio in ways where I felt I'd be confident enough going into the networking and job application stage afterwards. But yeah, I'd say my final thought on boot camps is they are not kind of like a quick fix to just automatically get you a job. Like, at the end of the day, a lot of that work is still going to come down to you, putting in the time, going above and beyond like what that base is. But for me, the boot camp was really to have that accountability. And I think some of the things that I did in that boot camp, I probably could have done on my own without it. But I knew that it was going to keep me on a schedule. I was going to have a community of other folks that were there to talk through my designs, and to have other folks that were mentors. So the structure was really why I did it. So I'd say do your research, talk to people, figure out like what you're really trying to get out of the boot camp, and then ultimately understand that it's going to still come down to you putting in the time and putting in the work. The boot camp is just a tool kind of along that path.
Yeah. Very good points. So Isis, you pivoted into real estate development with no prior experience, and you had to leverage your network and storytelling. So I would love for you to share a little bit about that, how you made a case for yourself, and what lessons you learned from that experience.
Yeah, awesome. I'd be happy to. So prior to pivoting into real estate development, as we talked about, I was formerly a teacher, and then also transitioned slightly into being a speaker and an author. And I say slightly because it's all kind of, at the end of the day, teachers are speakers, and they're talking to some of the toughest audiences you have. My audience was 350 sixth graders every day. And so when you think about pivoting, I think what's important is to look at your resume and pull out common themes. So teaching, there's leadership, right? There's organization, right? You have to be able to organize these 350 kids. You have to have great time management skills. Even in the speaking world, right? Once I moved out and worked on my own, I was negotiating with the conferences. I was having to run my own. There's a lot that you have to do to run your own business as an entrepreneur. It's not just the speaking. You're now, you're now the one that's behind the business too. So there were a lot of skills that I had picked up between those two experiences that transferred to what I want to do in real estate. Being able to negotiate deals. And I think in any industry, but especially in real estate, it's all about networking and really becoming, it's a really tight knit community. And so how you collaborate, how you engage with people carries a lot of weight. So those were some skills that I could transfer over. But ultimately, I think when it comes to making the transition, you have to be able to tell a story around that, right? And so I would use different experiences within my teaching. I had a story for everything to be able to paint the picture, make the case for, I wouldn't just say, hey, I have great time management skills. I would tell them, when I was teaching, I was also formerly in pageantry. I was also a speaker and an author. Here's how I manage my time. Here's the story of how I think it'll relate to what I'm going to be doing next. So I guess I would summarize that all by saying, when you look at your resume, pull out those common skills, pull out those common themes, and then attach stories to those things so that you're not just telling them what it is, but you're painting a picture for how you did it. I did that over and over again as I made my case to moving to my last position.
Mm. Yes, that's really a great tip about storytelling. I wish someone would have told me that before. But I do think that's a really important skill to kind of convey to people, like, or try to convince people, that you are, up for this new challenge, this new path. So shifting a bit, one key factor in changing your career path is the belief that you can. So believing in yourself, creating your core values that Logan kind of mentioned earlier, and having a clear understanding of where you want to go is extremely important. So, Logan, you have gone from consulting at major companies to co-founding, three businesses in partnership with your dad. So, like, what mind shifts were most crucial for you in that transition?
Well, I think like there's a couple things in terms of like mindset shift. In terms of like the topic of work, even though I was in tech, the work that I was doing like was very consulting oriented and it was very like big picture oriented. And so I think that it is really relevant to the actual work on the ground that I do about like answering big picture questions and applying some kind of a structure to a question and deciding if it's a good decision, right? Thinking like, what would I need to know in order to know the answer to this question, and then figuring out how to get that info and applying it to the structure. But I think the one thing that like I needed to shift for sure was that I realized when I left Slack and Salesforce that the pay and the benefits associated with a big company, like I was subconsciously like tying my self-worth to how big my salary was. Like I was really used to the rhythm of every year either getting like a promotion or switching jobs and then like getting a better comp package. And I had functionally some institution telling me this is how much we think that you're worth. And as long as that number kept going up each year, then I felt really good about myself. And then to have that number not just like go down, but like to have that whole framework and structure disappear made me realize how much I was like tying my self-worth and sense of accomplishment to like the approval and validation and pay of these big companies. And so in terms of like mindset shift, I really needed to do the mental work to kind of break that association in my mind in order to start a new business and still like feel good about myself. You know what I mean?
And with these businesses, obviously, you have to take a lot of risk. So, and when I was, getting to know you a little more before this conversation, you mentioned something about consequences of failures are small. So, how has this belief shaped your approach to entrepreneurship and risk taking?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think like part of planning a career transition or just like doing anything entrepreneurial in general is kind of doing a thought exercise of asking yourself, like, well, what is the absolute worst case scenario and how scared am I of that? And in my worst case scenario, I knew that I was leaving on good terms with my team at Slack, and then I felt like I could always go back if I needed to. And then I also knew that I could keep my expenses like really, really low. Like I don't have kids and I don't have pets and I don't live in like a nice apartment. And so obviously this is very different for someone who does have those things. It completely changes the calculus, but I knew that I could get my expenses down to like under 2K per month. And so when you have your effective burn rate, and then you make some assumptions about how much that you think you can earn per month, and how much you have saved, then I realized that I functionally could give this a try for as long as I wanted. It would really be more of a question of like, am I tired of living really, really cheaply than of like something catastrophic happening? And so I think that's what I mean when I say that the consequences of failure are small in this case.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really important to kind of understand your finances a little more when you are making the shifts, how long you can take when you are um applying for a boot camp or, establishing businesses. It's kind of understanding like where you are financially and using that as a frame to like, how you should move in the future. Isis, you mentioned a little bit about, purpose and vision in our prior conversation. And I would love to know, like, how has this mantra guided your decision through each of your pivots from, pageantry to now, real estate?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, I thank you for this conversation because I'm learning a lot from Logan and Maya as well. And so much of what you said, Logan, I really resonate with. And I think when you talk about purpose and vision, this idea of being more than your paycheck and more than your title, it may sound cliche, but it's real. We have 168 hours in every week. And most of that 9 to 5 every single day, at least for some of us, maybe even more for others, goes to work. And it's so important for us to realize that work is so much more than just a job. It's most of our life. So showing up somewhere and really enjoying what you do, really being stretched by what you do, really being challenged by what you do is, to me, you're not living if that's not what it feels like, you know? And for me personally, I just think life is just too short not to thrive where you are. And of course, there's going to be certain seasons where it's just going to be difficult. I mean, let's just be real. Like your work is just not going to be fun every single day. But you should still feel like you're happy, that you're joyful, that you have a sense of being alive. So for me, a lot of my pivots have come by being sensitive to, man, I'm making a great paycheck, but I'm not growing. I feel like I'm just on repeat every day, or maybe it's like, okay, well, I've gotten this skill set, but now I want to pivot to something else. So I really think when we talk about mentality shift, it's honestly understanding that your job is so much more. It has to fit into your life as well. To Logan's point about family and different dynamics, work impacts so much of that. And I think if we do ourselves a disservice when we just move thinking upon next title, or next check or next company, because it's work is just too much of our life to make these moves very carelessly. So for me, that's what I mean by moving with a sense of purpose.
I love that. Maya, so I wanted to talk about a little bit about, imposter syndrome. I think a lot of us may have this when we are jumping into something new. And I would love to hear from you, like, how did you build confidence, as you moved into UX design and your current industry?
Great question. um, I think imposter syndrome is something that never fully goes away. I think it ebbs and flows depending on sort of where we're at in our careers. And I think when you're doing a big career transition, it appears or it can come through a little bit stronger. And so for me, it was reminding myself through the process of deciding to leave and pursue a totally new job in a totally new industry, and going through the boot camp and kind of doing as much as I could to not compare myself to other people, but instead be inspired by what other people are doing and say, oh, well, these people are doing, X, Y, and Z, or their portfolio looks like this, or, this person who's, 10 years further along in their career are doing these things. And that's really exciting to me. How can I do something like that? And I think it was just, it's constant work. I mean, honestly, this doesn't just go away, instantly, but it was just kind of doing those reminders. I even wrote some people might find this silly, but I would write like little sticky notes and put them in, on my bulletin board or like in the corner of my monitor if I ever was feeling super down of like, wow, like, can I do this? Or who am I to think I'm able to totally switch? And then reminding myself, no, I'm smart, I'm organized, I'm dedicated. I have all these skills and all these main things that I'm seeing as big tenets of the role that I want to move into. I already have. I just need to continue to build on those hard skills. And the more I spoke with people that were in kind of the tech space, because I was moving right from like higher ed to wanting to move into the tech space. I was targeting smaller startups. That is a total mindset shift, and there were a lot of things that I knew I wasn't going to fully know going into it. Right, like as you go into a transition, you only know what you know, and you continue to learn as you talk to people and go through the process. So even now, I look back and I'm like, man, there's so much stuff that I know now that I didn't even know during the transition, and I just I kept my head down and kept moving, and it paid off. So anyway, the point of kind of all of this is to say that imposter syndrome will come and go. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something to just kind of remind yourself of your worth. Have those conversations with people. Whether it's maybe journaling for a little bit and talking about your strengths and the things that you've done. That's kind of where or what worked for me, and know that we all are growing constantly. We year by year, we as individuals may be different, and so what we're looking for in a job or a role may change. And I think consistently having that internal check-in with yourself about, what do I want to do? Am I still feeling like I'm making an impact? Am I still happy? And how can I continue to grow, and to know that many other people are dealing with the same thing as well. No one has it fully figured out. And I think kind of like giving yourself a little bit of that sanity check can sometimes be helpful.
Yeah. I really like that sticky note idea. Something to have when you wake up in the morning to remind yourself of who you are and what you're capable of. That's really a great tip. So this question is for everyone, so feel free to jump in. There may be someone attending today's session who may not know what their next move is, and someone may be feeling stuck in their career, but unsure of where to go next. So like, I would like to hear from each of you, like what advice you would give someone who is in that position.
So I'll hop in here. So I think, again, kind of going along with this theme that work is just so much more than work, right? It really can impact us mentally, emotionally. This might sound like kind of a silly thing, but go and have some fun somewhere. You've got to de-stress. You've got to de-stress and open up your mind. It's really hard to dream. It's really hard to imagine when you're stuck in that environment. So getting connected to the things that just have nothing to do with work, whether it's coloring or laser tag or rock climbing or whatever it is, you get in a position where you remember that life is so much more than work. And as we get freed up and we get de-stressed, I find, at least personally, whether it's a great run, I'm able to have so much more brain space to dream and to imagine and to create. And that's the space that you want to make your career pivot out of, not out of a place of desperation and fear. So I really think just loosening up and doing whatever you need to do to be able to get in a space to dream is probably the number one thing you have to do first.
Absolutely. Isis, I'm super with that. I think, my thought is exactly the same, is that if you're feeling stuck, I mean, you kind of got to do the deep meditative mental work to, understand, yeah, your values, and like doing activities like that can help you do it. And I think also, you have to ask yourself questions like, when do I feel the most like myself? What are my most significant moments in life and why? Where do I gain the most joy and purpose and meaning? And I think like from the answers to those questions, when you spend time on stuff like that, I think that's like following that, and trying to figure out what careers and how you want to spend your time, what fits the answers to those questions is kind of the first component, of figuring out why you feel stuck and what you want to do instead. And I also think one other thing I'll say too, while we're on the topic, like the second component, I think, is like, if you really don't like doing your work, I think it's totally fine to change it. Absolutely. Like if fine, it's fine if you have a job that you don't like. Half the equation is learning what you don't like. But once you know that you don't like it, you should give yourself permission to leave. Like there's definitely risk involved with leaving and trying something you haven't done before, but there's also a cost to staying too. Like there's a massive opportunity cost to staying where you are, and life is really short. And Isis, like you said, like there's only so many hours, in a week in your life. And so it's too important to spend your time doing something that isn't interesting or important to you.
I have a couple of quick notes to follow up, and I both of what you're saying, Isis and Logan, just really resonate so strongly. And something that I mentioned earlier that I think is very similar to what you were saying, Logan, but I talk about this thing called the flow state. Maybe some of you are familiar with that or use that in terms, but as you're reflecting on, what you really enjoy doing, I think about like, when have you just totally lost track of time with your work? And and it may not even be work, right? It could be anything that you're doing. Maybe it's for, a community project that you're doing part-time, or you volunteer in your community gardens and you're helping organize volunteer lists or something. Like, I don't know, but whatever that looks like, some sort of task. If you've done it and you just kind of get lost in it and you're with whatever you're doing, that's kind of what I call the flow state, and noting like, what do I really enjoy, and how can I add more of that into my life? And so those are just some high level kind of notes to kind of keep to your, not keep to yourself, but just to kind of reflect on as you're going through this process of where you feel energized when you're working or connecting with people, or doing anything. And then the second part too that I kind of did during this whole process, it was like over a year of even deciding that, I wanted to leave my job and make a change. I've been thinking about, okay, where am I kind of feeling like, or what is the direction that I'm feeling like I want to move in? And part of that was actually just talking to lots of different people about their jobs, some jobs that I didn't even end up doing, like and I think when we are in our careers, we get so deep in this hole, or at least I did. I don't want to kind of assume everyone has the same exact path, but I was into this role. I knew exactly what my next steps were if I stayed in this specific career path. But I knew, okay, well, my friends do investment banking, or my friends, are consultants, or, they're architects or whatever. And I didn't really know what that day to day looked like. And so, a small piece of advice that could be helpful if you're really unsure about, what next steps you want to take, is just reach out to close friends, family, people who you're really comfortable talking to, and just, ask if they'd be willing to chat about their day to day and what they do and things they like about their job. And it may bring up things for you where you realize, hey, I didn't even know that was a thing you could do. I didn't even know that was a career, or that's a really cool element of their job. I might want to do something like that. And those kind of little bits of information, this is all kind of part of that larger research stage of understanding like what sounds interesting to you. But it could be helpful to talk to different people that are in different industries and jobs. Again, areas that you may not even end up going in specifically, but there might be elements of those things that stand out to you. So, that's kind of like maybe an easy way to move into that networking space and learning about what other people do.
Yeah.
I'd love to add that real quick,
Yeah.
Kashima. That's one of my favorite things to do. I've already started doing it. I call them informational interviews. And sometimes, there might be people in your network. And even if they aren't, I would recommend, it's one of my favorite things, research the heck out of them, right? Because when you ask for someone's time, you should really honor it, right? And you never know what that conversation is going to lead to. So how you show up on that call with sometimes I like to say, someone taught me this a few years ago, and it's great. Instead of asking just for time, be like, hey, can I get 15 minutes of your time? You get on that call, you get 15 minutes, you have your top 3 questions that you ask, knock it out of the park. And more often than not, it's going to be a lot longer than 15 minutes. And if you do a really great job, either they can become a mentor, they can maybe even offer you a position that they have, or make a great connection. So just to tag on what Maya said, I love that idea about, just reaching out and making some calls.
Yeah. Really, really great advice. To summarize that, well, all of what you said is life is short, so quit your jobs. And just kidding, don't quit your job. Think about it first. Think about it. So a lot of you already touched on utilizing your network and maximizing your relationships. So Logan, if you could share a little bit about how you leverage your network when it comes to, building your expertise, validating some of the ideas that you had for your businesses. Yeah, can you talk more a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's super important. It's kind of the entire basis for my ability to like make a transition like this because I am in a completely new industry that I absolutely and I don't trust myself to navigate it using only the intrinsic knowledge that I have. So I absolutely have to rely on others. And so the strength of my community and the people that I know is really important. But it's been a big challenge. Like I think I really took for granted like at a big company like Slack or Salesforce, you can shoot virtually anyone in the company in any office around the world to Slack and say, "Hey, I know you work on this, and I'm working on this, and we've never talked before, but I think we should chat because I want to learn more about what you do and ask you a few questions." And it's so much harder to do that with just like random people in the world. It has not been my experience that you can just blast off a ton of emails and get 100% response rate with people who are willing to talk to you. And so in terms of like how I've leveraged my network, UChicago has been really valuable. I found people through that. I've also found people through, I found conferences that were about the specific things that I was trying to learn. And I went to those and those have been immensely valuable. And the other thing I'll say too is like, um, people's time is really valuable to them. And there have been scenarios where, I find someone that, I really like and I really value their advice. And I think they're really well spoken. And, you know, I, and I want to keep them around. And so I offer to retain them to keep them on the team, like as in I will pay you money to be able to call you up anytime and ask you questions. I think your advice is so valuable, and you're not necessarily a team member, but I want to be able to call on you and ask you lots of questions. And so that's something I've done too, is like if I somewhat see someone who's like, I think their advice is really valuable and we really connect. Like I will draft something up to see if I can figure out a way to keep them around and keep them in my life if it's that valuable.
Yeah. That's a great way to utilize your network is to bring value to that person as well while you are extracting value from them. So Isis, you are exploring project management, at the moment. I would love to hear how you are approaching this next career transition. So what resources, methods are you using to gather insights as you make this pivot?
Yeah, sure. So formally, as of 2 weeks ago, I was a senior real estate manager for Mod Pizza. Primarily, my role was to find their locations and negotiate the leases and usher it through the build out process. Typically, when you're a deal maker, is what we call it in the real estate industry, you really only focus on those deals. You negotiate the deal, and then you get back out on the ground and find a new site and negotiate a deal again. But at Mod, I had the luxury of really being heavily involved in the build out. So I got to work with architects and engineers and construction managers. And I realized when we talk about flow state and like what you enjoy the most, that's what I loved. Like I came alive when I did that portion of my work, but it wasn't the majority. It wasn't really what I was getting paid to do. And so my decision to move into project management is specifically my goal was to move it within real estate development, working with developers and architects and engineers full time. That's what I want to do. Right. And so who am I talking to? Well, all the folks that I've worked with over the last 4 years. And so those out of that has come a lot of great connections, even a new mentor now who's teaching me, to Maya's point, the hard skills, the concrete skills that you really need to be able to do that. A lot of the tactical skills. So that's part of where I'm starting is just making those connections with the people that I've already worked with, and trying to aim into the direction that I want to head to next.
So this next question is for, everyone, so feel free to jump in again. Looking back on your journey, like what is one piece of advice you wish you had at the start of your career transition?
I mean, I'll jump in because it's two things I said already, but it's totally worth reiterating. I think the first is take risk. To make a serious career pivot, you have to take risk. But it's worth acknowledging that there is risk to staying where you are too. Like there's absolutely an opportunity cost to just staying where you are. And then the other thing I said, but I want to drive home, is to break the association between your salary and self-worth. Like the sooner that you'll do it, the better. Often, like if you're making a serious career pivot that's really different, you may very well, it may be lateral, or it may be like a step back in terms of salary, right? Or it may just be a less lucrative industry in general. And so it'll be just a massive challenge if you can't get over the hump of breaking the tide between your self-worth and your salary. So I think those are the two things that I wish I had approached like first thing before I even made the career transition.
Maya, you,
Yeah, this is
yes.
this is a small piece of advice that I got while I was in the process of the transition. So it sort of answers your question because I did utilize it during that process, but I didn't have it, from the very beginning. Um, I think the first, or maybe it's a two part answer, but it relates to the networking and the outreach again, because that can feel very, very scary. It took me a while to get comfortable reaching out to people and connecting with my network. And I think that was something that I just kind of had to do. And people would give me the advice, you just have to do it. Like, send an email, blah, blah, blah. But just sometimes just doing that is hard. And so I think, if someone had just maybe even shared the advice in that way of like, it may feel challenging, but as soon as you start having those conversations, it gets so much easier. And so just start earlier. If you're already thinking about that, start earlier would be kind of my one piece of advice on that. And then the second thing, which is a piece of advice that someone gave while I was having some of these conversations during this process, was that as you are talking to people and connecting, even if it's a 15-minute, informational interview, at the end of the call, you can always include something like, "Hey, this was so great. Is there anybody in your network that you think would be a good person to talk to?" And that way, it's another follow-up point for that person. What's the worst thing that can happen? They say, "Nope, sorry, I don't want to connect you with anyone," and you move on with your day. But I have had a 100% success rate with this, of someone saying, "Absolutely, I love talking with you. Like blah 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 blah. Here is someone that I used to work with 4 jobs ago, or here's one of my best friends." Coworkers who's in this space that I think you'd get along with. And that has been a great way for me to kind of expand learning, and also not feeling like I'm doing cold research, cold emails every single time, but there was already kind of a connection from someone else. So anyway, 2 pieces of advice: stop procrastinating, reaching out, just do it. I promise it gets easier once you do it. And the second thing, add that question in at the end: is there anyone else that you'd be able to connect me with? Because I promise that, it will at least increase your connections a little bit.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think I'd add to that. This is what I just did in real time. I think once you make that decision to leave, you don't have to jump off the cliff the next day. If you can, that's awesome, good for you. But it is great to have a plan. And sometimes when you do feel stuck, just making the decision can give you a little bit more of a lease on life, just mentally, emotionally, because okay, I've set this timeline. I'm leaving, in my case, December, right? I know I'm leaving in December. I'm getting my money right, and between now and then, I'm starting to already have conversations. So just making that decision and having a timeline might even help you be able to endure a little bit longer while you get things in position to be able to make that move. So I would just say you don't have to jump off the cliff necessarily today, but just know that, and also I'll just add, it builds a lot of grit to stay somewhere where you're like, I just want to leave now, like before 5, and to stay there and just endure while you make a plan. So yeah, more or less, you don't have to jump off the cliff today.
Yeah. Thank you all, for this wonderful conversation. You all shared really amazing, great insights, tips. I hope that people in the audience were able to walk away with some nuggets. I do want to leave enough time for questions. So if there's anyone in the audience that has questions, definitely feel free to drop them in the chat. And I am going to Just review the chat really quickly to see if there were any questions that we could get started right away. There was a question earlier about boot camps. Ali mentioned that they weren't familiar with it. So Maya, do you mind sharing a little bit more about, what is a boot camp?
Yeah, absolutely. A boot camp is essentially, I mean, like I said, different shapes and sizes of boot camps for different industries and specific jobs and specific, hard skills. But typically, they are a short-term kind of like program, a course that you will take that will help you upskill. And so it could be something where you're like, maybe I'm already a software engineer and I want to, go to a higher level of something. Like you could do a boot camp to do that. So for some people, it's a boot camp to completely shift careers, like in my case, and it helps me to just kind of build that first design portfolio and help for things that I would need in interviews for kind of that new role. So um, yeah, the short is it's a program you sign up for, and it can vary from length of time, full time, part time, depending on the industry. And there is obviously a cost associated with that. So for like I mentioned earlier, doing your research on the different boot camps, again, just depending on the industry you are in or want to move into, it is going to vary greatly. And speaking with people who have done those boot camps can be helpful as well, because in my specific industry, like in UX and product, it's a different, maybe a different sort of set of factors that I was looking at versus someone that wants to move into software engineering or project management or something else. Like yeah. And then I don't know if there's any other questions for boot. There's a question on here like, what factors did you take into consideration with the boot camp?
Mhm.
I mean, for me, it came down to cost. It came down to like, was there pretty much almost all of them were remote. It was also during COVID, so there was a remote factor anyway. But maybe like an in-person versus remote, cost, how often you're meeting, kind of what assignments look like, pace of work, all of those types of things. And then also job placement assistance is something as well that most do some form of job placement assistance. It was something I was looking for. I always say like be wary of the like 100% job placement, like at the end of the day, like I said, a boot camp is a tool. It's not just like you're not just going to do it and it's going to spit you out on a job. It's a part of the process. So anyway, I'll stop there because I know we have more questions, but hopefully that's helpful for just boot camp questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Maya. Someone else asked a question about framing your storytelling. So this is geared towards you, Isis. This person says, I loved how you framed your storytelling around common and transferable skills. Do you have any advice for an older person like myself who is in fact changed careers over 5 times, but more often than not changed for a variety of non-career related reasons?
Yeah, I guess to start, and thank you for the question. This is really interesting. I think to start, it makes me think about your stats in the beginning, Kashima, where you said like I think the average person does 5 to 7 times. So whoever asks this question, you got at least 2 more in your average. Like you're fine. I think just taking the stigma off of changing and will probably help part of that. But I think it's also important to be really honest about what were those reasons. When I say storytelling, what I'm not saying is to make up a story, right? Just to find a story. It's okay. We all have transitions. Like for example, one of the reasons why I was at my last transition was because things were changing a lot in my family, and I just said, you know what, this works for me right now. This where I am works for my lifestyle right now. I don't want to move. But in the same way, there might be things happening in your personal life that call for a change, and we're all human when we're interviewing. People understand that. So I just think being real with what is the reason and being true to that story, and then making sure that wherever you land next fits, what season you're in at this time.
We have a question about moving to a new city for an industry change. Does anyone have any advice around that?
My thought is most recruiting happens remotely. Like you can go through a full interview process without having to be in the city. So my thought is you would move to the city once you've secured the job that you want. You, to me, it wouldn't make as much sense to move in anticipation of a change, right? Because you can effectively do your recruiting from wherever you are. That's like my knee-jerk response there. But that said, I mean, moving cities can be really, really fun and exciting, and it definitely pairs well with like a new job. So, I mean, I certainly have loved the times that I've moved.
Anyone else have a response to moving to a new city?
Not necessarily just for moving to a new city, but this is a strategy for networking sometimes is volunteering. When you do like when there's volunteer days, there's people from all over, no one cares about titles, no one cares about paychecks, just people from all different industries just working on initiative that day. And I have met so many people in a variety of places just by volunteering in the community. And then to tie on to that, a lot of nonprofits are looking for people to help. So I have found that when you work with nonprofits, whether that's a ministry, a church, or maybe it's a local food bank or whatever, you volunteer your time. It's a great place to it's a low risk way to build skills and give back to a place that really actually needs you. So maybe you don't have marketing skills outside, but man, there's probably a nonprofit that wouldn't mind you taking a stab at running their Facebook page or their Instagram. So I would keep in mind that as a strategy for building your network and gaining experience.
Yeah, great advice. One thing that we didn't touch on is the money part of transitioning to different careers, specifically salary. So there's a question about how did you navigate salary discussions when transitioning to a new industry where you have the necessary skills for the roles, but are shifting from being an expert in your previous field to a more novice in a new one?
I can start briefly on this question. I think the first thing is doing your market research just on the industries. I mean, just kind of getting a sense of what are people making in the different bands or levels of the job that you're planning to move into. I mean, that just feels like, again, basic level research that you'll probably do as you're looking into these careers and different roles. And then also speaking with people as well. If many people may not be comfortable sort of sharing that, but what they make, right? If you're having like informational interviews or something, there were a couple of like closer friends that were helpful in just saying, hey, this is kind of like what product designers in their like first or second level are making at my company right now. This is what you should be kind of asking for. So that was helpful for me to just get a sense of what that might look like at different companies for the people that I was talking to and information that they were comfortable sharing. So that helped me just get a sense of what can I expect to make and what does that look like. And then I also think to the point of like that feeling like, you're not good enough or am I worth it and all of that, just reminding yourself that you have a lot of important skills that you're bringing to the table and that you can do. So not to sell yourself short. Obviously there's, you don't want to be like totally blowing the number out of the water, but I think just making sure that that you are advocating for yourself and looking at what the industry is paying. And I think that people will respect that if it seems like you know what you're talking about and you're comparing against what other folks are making as well. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add. That's just from my experience.
I have nothing to add in terms of the career transition because obviously I'm doing something entrepreneurial. I'm setting my own salary functionally. There's no one I'm negotiating with. But one thing I just will say that when I was in tech, and I think I wish someone had told me this at the beginning of my career, is that you always negotiate no matter what. Like you always ask because they can say no and they're prepared to say no. They're prepared for people to negotiate, but you are almost always leaving money on the table if you don't ask. You may not move the needle by like a full salary band, but generally speaking, recruiters are given like a band that they're able to negotiate within. And if you don't ask, more likely than not, you're going to end up at the lower end of the band. And so you always ask, no matter what, even if you do it poorly, even if you're not prepared, you have to kick off that conversation.
Yeah, agreed. Um, One more question, maybe. We do have time for another question if anyone wants to ask. But there's a personal question that's a few people would like to know about you all is, are you married? Do you have children? And how has that affected your career change, if so?
I do not have kids. I'm going to be married. I have a wonderful fiance who's in the chat now, and who we met at UChicago. We're both undergrads from the same year, which is phenomenal.
Congrats.
I'm married adjacent, but it absolutely changes the calculus, right? Like if I had kids, I think I'd be significantly more risk averse, right? I'd be much less willing to radically change my like quality of life in order to try to do something entrepreneurial if I had kids. I think that's like directionally how it would change. Doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means you're gonna be more risk averse. And it means you need to probably save for longer in order to make the change, whereas I only needed to save for a couple months, right? To be ready to do it. Whereas, if you have kids, your expenses are higher and your risk tolerance is lower.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Oh, congrats, Logan. That's super exciting.
Thank you.
I think so. I'm not married. I don't have any kids yet. I look forward to being this year. Actually, we have some plans to get married this year. But that being said,
Congrats.
so that being said, it's kind of interesting. I've thought a lot about this as a single woman, technically, right? I don't have the luxury of anyone else's salary. So any risks that I take, it's all me, you know? But in the same way, if you're married, that could provide a little bit of comfort. So it's interesting to think about those dynamics, but it's also scary to leave your job if you know you're going to be planning a wedding soon, right? So I think there's a lot of, I think ultimately, regardless of what your situation is, know that if you plan, you can make it happen. You just have to be comfortable with your risk profile, I guess I would say.
Yeah, agree on both of those. I am not married. I've been with my boyfriend for over 6 years, also a UChicago alum. Woo!
Oh,
So I think we've been living together. We are very candid about expenses. So obviously, like from my own risk, I always have to think about a lot of those things that you mentioned, Isis. Like if I'm doing this, like what is my kind of 3 month savings look like? How can I sort of make that work for a job transition, but then also having candid conversations with your partner. And so I knew that my partner was going to support me through this time as well. And again, not legally married, but having those conversations about, hey, is my rent going to change a little bit, or what would that look like, and how can we make this work? And so it depends on everybody's unique situation, but that was definitely something that he and I had chatted about pretty seriously as I was making some of these changes. So
Well, we have come to the end of the hour. Round of virtual applause for our panelists. Each of you shared really awesome and amazing advice. Thank you for sharing your story, your career journeys with us. I hope the audience enjoyed it as well. So just thank you for your time. And thank you for all who joined us this afternoon. So as a reminder, when you leave the webinar, you will be prompted